why does the West hate Russia? It's very irrational, because we have a lot in common, and we have one big common ground, and that's Christianity.
You say in this article, your words, I experienced a fantastic energy, a moral energy similar to America in the 1950s, if you all remember that, if you're old enough to remember that.
And that Europe will collapse somehow, culturally, spiritually, economically. So we need to understand that Christianity is not going to die. It's just going to live somewhere else.
Get involved, get loud, and think on the brink.
Well, we're going to get a few truths today. It's Malcolm Out Loud. Welcome to the show. I would like you to meet Iben Thranholm. And Iben, take just a quick minute now. You come from Denmark. You're a journalist. Tell us just a little bit.
I'm a journalist and a theologian. I have studied theology, so my field in journalism is religion and politics, spirituality, and I would say that now, in our time, I mean, religion is back on the agenda very much so.
It is, for a lot of reasons, you know. I didn't know you were a theologian as well. Yeah, I didn't remember that, okay. Yeah. So you have a good background in this, there's no doubt about this. All right, you wrote an article. I want to start here because I read the article, and it's a very interesting read. It's on a publication called Russia Insider, okay. And the title is Russia and the West Have Swapped Spiritual and Cultural Roles, okay? But I think you're suggesting that Russia is the new West and the United States would be the new East. How are they swapping these roles even? Tell me.
Like everybody else that grew up during the Cold War, I had an image of Russia as the evil empire. Communists, you know, people that were sent to Gulag, especially Christians. But
tear down this wall, right?
Yeah, exactly. And if anybody had told me while I was growing up in Scandinavia that one day I would stand on the Red Square and have a feeling that I had much more freedom as a believer than I had in the West, I would have thought people would, I mean, this guy or this woman would have been insane. But that was actually what I experienced the first time I came to Moscow, and that was a year ago. Because I was getting curious about what was going on in Russia, because I could see that there was a huge revival of orthodoxy.
So that was your very first trip to that area?
Yes.
So okay.
And that was while the Ukraine the Ukraine crisis was peaking. And everybody said, don't go, you don't know, there might be spies and there might be microphones in the wall. And my friend said, it's really not wise to go.
So you're a journalist from Denmark, you make this trip to Moscow, and even, I mean, it's crazy, and you're there on Red Square, and you're telling yourself, you know, and you went out of, I guess, curiosity.
And also because I wanted to do some research, because I could see that Christianity was reviving after the fall of communism. Alone in Moscow, they're planning to build 2,000 new churches right now. So that's
2,000?
2,000 new churches, because there's simply not enough churches for all the people that wants to go to church.
Wow.
And living in Scandinavia, which is a very, very secular area, we're closing churches. So I was getting kind of curious, what's going on there? Because as a believer and also a reporter that is reporting about those things, I just had to go and see. And I was extremely astonished to see that what we are being told by the mainstream media in the West is not true.
It's not true.
I would, you know, when I came back, I wrote a column with a headline, Moscow is the new Manhattan. Because,
how did that go over?
Well, people thought I was crazy, but now they start to say, maybe she has a point. But I felt this, first of all, I felt a spiritual freedom. And for days, you know, I'm a journalist, I'm working with words. So it was this kind of feeling in my soul that I felt free.
Yeah.
And people were treating me like a VIP because I came as a Christian journalist from the West. As a Christian journalist in Denmark or in Scandinavia or in Europe, I would be somebody people would not think very highly of.
But isn't this interesting? So you go there, most people would think when you're from the West, really, that you would be spies and deceit and, oh boy, she's in Red Square, right? It's all of that image. And yet, somehow or another, you feel freer, you feel more relaxed somehow.
Yeah, but when you stand on the Red Square, there is the huge department store called GUM, which is like Macy's in New York. And you can have all the luxury brands like Prada, Dior, everything. They have everything. It's very luxurious. Above every entrance, they have placed an icon of Christ the Pantocrator or Our Holy Mother. And it's recently
In the store?
About the entrances. So before you go and buy
Wow.
your Prada bag
Right.
or your Dior jacket,
Right.
you can say a prayer. You can think about eternity before you go and spend money.
Wow.
And above every entrance to the Kremlin, they also put up icons with St. George and the dragon. So it's everywhere in the Red Square you will find religious Christian symbols.
It's just part of their culture, and I've seen things to that point, but I applaud you for going to see firsthand what really was going on. You say in this article, your words, I experienced a fantastic energy, a moral energy similar to America in the 1950s, if you all remember that, if you're old enough to remember that. I'm not, but I do remember reading it.
I'm not that old either, but I've seen the films, you know.
Yeah, so with the old moral values you're
Yeah,
talking
exactly.
about, okay.
Yeah.
You said I met helpful, poetic, and cultured people with a spirit of self-sacrifice I have not seen before. The atmosphere in Moscow is completely different than any capital in Europe, and unlike here in the West, and I feel much more spiritually free in the East. It's an amazing revelation what you make here, what you say.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't compute to most Americans would not see that.
Definitely not.
And they don't do it back in Denmark. They wouldn't see that either, would they?
No, not at all. They would see the opposite. And I had my producer with me some months ago, and he had never been to Russia before, and he's not even religious. He had the same experience.
Right.
He said, "This is fantastic."
So he's seen it as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
So everybody that goes would feel this energy, and also that I would say Russian culture is not that self-focused. They don't have this kind of selfie mentality. They're more self-sacrificial because they have gone through so many tough times.
So many tough
They
times.
have given so many
Yeah,
sacrifices.
they have. The Russian people.
And
no
it's
doubt.
deep in the Russian soul. And also now they're coming back to orthodoxy. You have to keep in mind that communism was a Western idea. It was Karl Marx, who was a German philosopher. So it was a sort of Western ideology that was imposed on them.
And they took it and expanded it and grew it with the
And now
Soviet Union.
Now it's kicked out.
Yeah.
They want to come
Right.
back to what is real Russian, and that's Christianity, Orthodox Christianity.
You know, what a turning point. I just want to pause a moment and say, in the world, as I think back at Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, Pope John Paul, what they did along with, Mikhail Gorbachev, and how that all changed. Remember that whole infrastructure, and back to what we said moments ago, tear down that wall. This whole East-West thing sort of transformed itself early on. You know, the little bits of it started, I think, somehow. I want to touch back here. This is really important. We talk about the media. This perception, which is, to me, very dangerous, okay? That you have governments and you have, to me, even it's like the government and the media, they're in business together somehow.
Exactly.
That's all I can say, yeah. So somehow they're together, I guess. I mean, it doesn't make any sense otherwise. And but I wanted to ask you, what does the media have to gain by these lies and deception? Are they not willing to step up and accept the truth? Do you know what?
It's a very good question, because I have asked myself many times, why does the West hate Russia? It's very irrational, because we have a lot in common, and we have one big common ground, and that's Christianity. It's a Christian culture. They are our friends. I mean, they should not be our enemies. It's not a foreign culture, it's a Christian culture.
So, and pause there just a moment. Just, folks, take just a quick moment and think about what Iben just said. Just think about this a moment, because it hits me. You don't even think about it in those terms when you think about the value of the Christianity with the Russian people and the West, as you say. And Christianity is under fire all over the world. This is a fact. This is not an imagination. But bring it back to this point. It is so huge. And yet nobody pays attention to it. Nobody pays attention to it. Can you imagine, as I said to you before we came on, what would the world be and look like if Russia, which we all hoped in America after the fall of the Soviet Union, after all that happened, that there would be a new paradigm, peace. And what would that be like if Russia and America really worked together? Is that possible?
I hope so, but I think today you cannot understand what's going on in the world if you don't have a spiritual perspective.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid, that's the way I see it, that there are evil forces, spiritual forces in the West that hates Russia because it is resurrecting as a Christian nation. Because, as you say, there was a worldwide, globally, persecutions of Christians. So when a big country like Russia is suddenly resurrecting as this very profound Christian nation, you can expect some attacking.
Do you think that's what the media has against this? What you just say?
I don't think you can understand the media and the politics if you only think in geopolitical terms. I think you have to think in spiritual terms, because it is irrational. It's irrational because Russia has not invaded any country since the end of the Cold War. Actually, it has been quite quiet. Putin was very interested in cooperating with the West in the beginning.
Okay.
But the Russians are disappointed by the West, and when you come to Moscow, they all say, "Why do you hate us so much? What have we done?"
And they say that in Moscow.
Yeah, because they don't understand why
Right.
we think they're so evil.
Right.
Simply
The
don't
people.
understand.
But listen, I said to you earlier, say to you, the people in governments are not ever often representative of the people of the government. Sadly, it's the dictators, it's the government officials, it's the people who run in these offices that make these. It's not the people. It's not the people. But you just said something that people, my audience, would give me a lot of hell for, that I have to now explore with you, because you just made the point, which I didn't. This isn't about Ukraine today in Crimea. We don't have the time to cover these topics like this, but you make the point that Russia had not invaded anybody since then. I have to go back and circle that now, which I wasn't planning to, but I need for you to explain. For those who are watching who would say, what is she talking about? Because they did indeed invade the Crimea and Ukraine, certainly eastern Ukraine. What would you say to that?
I would say, if you watch non-Western media, they would say that the US and the EU was behind what happened in Kiev, and Russia just reacted to that. But it was not an aggression firsthand.
You're talking about with NATO.
Yeah.
And you're talking about, again, there's a lot of conversation with the energy that Russia has been sending underneath Ukraine, what happened in the sabotage of.
You also have to remember there was an agreement between Reagan and Gorbachev that all the old Warsaw Pact countries should not become NATO countries. They all are today.
Yeah, well, there was also you're right.
So I think with Ukraine, Russia had to react.
But there was also an agreement that we wouldn't invade Ukraine based on the fact that we were taking the nuclear weapons away. Russia and America agreed on that, and yet that has not happened.
But coming back to the spiritual perspective, one of the reasons why Kiev and Ukraine is so important to the Russians is because that Kiev was the place where Russia was baptized to become Christians by Prince Vladimir in 1988. No, not 19. 988. So it's 1,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And there is a spiritual bonding between Minsk, Kiev, and Moscow, which is the Orthodox triangle. So it's part of their culture. That's what we don't understand, and it's not reported.
Okay. I want to, as we cover here a little more, I want to touch on this here. You say here in this piece, the situation in the West is the complete opposite. We celebrate death and have surrendered to the satanic view of man in a self-righteous rage and rant against God. We can divorce with ease online. We prioritize work and career above family responsibilities, especially raising children. We favor euthanasia, abortion on demand, homosexual rights and same-sex marriage, while our cities are submerged in Islam and growing segregation. That is a mouthful, even. And so, having said that, when you look at all that, tell me about that in comparison. When you talk about the lies and deception of this list here, do you favor people making their own choices, or do you think that government knows best? Where do we draw that line?
I think of course, I'm in favor of a society where people can make their own choices. But I think every society needs to have a foundation of certain values to function well. And I think what the West is doing right now, it's actually creating a society where everything that is opposing God's created order is being disrupted, is being destroyed. And I don't think that such a culture is sustainable. So we are actually damaging ourselves by having those values. So to be free to have freedom is to be able to make the right choice, the true choice. That's freedom in my world.
So maybe the propaganda from the media and the political government is the corruption we continue to talk about,
Because somehow there is some kind of self-loathing, self-hatred. Pope Benedict talked about that some years ago, that there was this kind of self-hatred in the West, which is sort of makes the whole society disintegrate from inside.
Yeah.
Because of lack of values.
So when we talk about Christianity and we discuss that it is under siege around the world, we agree with this. I mean, Christians are being persecuted everywhere. Everywhere. I mean, this is not I mean, it's happening in America, it's happening in the Middle East, it's happening everywhere. What are your thoughts ahead in this particular way? Do you see an end to this at all? Do you see, in your own viewpoint, the rise back of Christianity? Do you see that we take it back? What's your feelings on this?
I'm afraid that my first feeling is that Europe is collapsing. I don't know about the US, I know about Europe. And that Europe will collapse somehow, culturally, spiritually, economically. So we need to understand that Christianity is not going to die. It's just going to live somewhere else. Because we turned our back on our Christian roots.
Right.
So there is a consequence.
Right.
And it means that our society will probably become, I would say that it will be more influenced by Islam than it is today.
Yeah.
Because it's a very proud religion, and they're practicing their religion, and it's a free country, so they are allowed to do this.
Listen, the deception of Islam and the things I've learned in the past year on this are remarkable. I've learned so much about it that, you know, the misconceptions of this, you know, out there. And I would agree with you, but you know what? I would say to you, I understand what you're saying about Europe, and I would say to you, and I don't say this in any joyful way, but America is not far behind that, sadly.
Yeah, that's my feeling too.
Yeah, sadly.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's very important now, at least for Christians, to understand what's going on in Russia, because it can bring hope. Like, for instance, we had dissidents coming from the Soviet Union to the West. I think it's going to be perhaps the reverse situation, that we will have Christians coming to Russia now, to be part of a society that is based on Christianity, like Europe used to be.
Yeah.
And you can find your freedom to practice your religion and to be in a social circle where Christianity is accepted, because it's not anymore in Europe that much. I know from being a debater and a public person that people say nasty things to you if you are too orthodox.
Iben, I mean, I only have a minute or two left, a couple of minutes left here, but I could talk to you for hours and days, and because we talked just before this came on, and we had a great conversation, did we not?
Absolutely.
We didn't have the camera here yet, and I said to her at that point, oh, we should have had the camera here. We solved most of the world's problems 20 minutes ago. And here we are, you know. But I could talk to you for days on these topics, you know, there's no doubt, and we will do some more talking. In fact, I will maybe say something, I hope I'm not talking out of turn here, that Iben is actually thinking about creating an interesting documentary, and I won't say much more about it. But this is very fascinating, and I'm fascinated to talk to her more about it and what she's thinking about it. I think the ultimate goal for me, and I hope for you, is not to damn the West. That's not what I'm certainly trying to do. I mean, I think this is where I come from, is that society and civilization, but is to wake people up even.
Exactly.
And to wake the politicians up and the people up, and really the people who have got to put these politicians into business, yeah?
You know, I love the West because I was born in the West.
Amen.
And I think it's very important to understand the truth and not be deceived what's going on.
It's called the out loud truth. That's
Exactly,
what I call
exactly.
It, you know?
So that's why if I say something negative about the West, it's only to make people wake up.
See, and I like that about you, because, you know, I want to tell you, as we close here, I want to say something, because we will talk again. Trust me, I believe we will talk again here. And whether you like what she says or not, I don't really care. You know, she speaks some truth, and I think we all need to wake up. She made a comment to me, Iben did, before we came on, a previous day when I met her. And she made this comment that stopped me in my tracks, because I was very offensive to it. I did not like it. But she said to me, the perception around the world is that America is invading other countries. Now, here's what's very strange about this. In America, we think that Russia is invading other countries, because this is the talking points. So there's this perception around the world with America in that regard. You know, I don't believe the American people at all are that way. This is not at all what they want. But I think governments continually push their agenda on people, whether they're a dictator or whether it's democracy, you know. And of course, in our case, we believe we have a dictator in the office right now. In the case of Barack Obama, many people would believe that. I would be one of them. So, in fact, I wanted to trade him to another country for, no player to be named later. They can have him. So on what I just said to you, final thoughts on this viewpoint of what you see, how people perceive America around the world. How do we fix that? How do we fix this?
I think we have to accept more diversity. And not everybody wants our democracy. And that it's not like sacred to other people. And that you can have even a democracy like they have in Russia. It's not like our democracy, but it functions well, and that's what the Russian wants.
Yeah.
I mean, almost 90% supports Putin. They like that.
His popularity in Russia is
Yeah.
sky high. Any American politician would give their right arm for that popularity.
So we need to accept
Yeah.
the fact
Yeah.
that not everybody wants to be like us.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I've said this, and I've said this many times to you all. You've heard me say we got to stop pushing that around there. I am a person of great values who believe in American exceptionalism, and I believe in the West and the society of what we have created. But unless we address some of the real big problems, the tough problems, we cannot begin to fix them if we don't address them and really understand what they are. So, anyways, I wasn't sure if I would like Iben when I first met her, when she said some of the things to me, but I like her. So, on that note, thank you. So, thanks for joining me. It's Malcolm Out Loud. Remember, get involved, get loud.